Hi everyone. I hope you've been learning a bit about Schoolbox. What I'm going to be going over is pretty basic, just how Schoolbox manages its kind of base level permissions. There's us. And that's me. Pretty much there's 3 levels of permissions in Schoolbox. There's read, write, and none. And there will be a lot of cat pictures coming up. Who can do it? Super users can do pretty much everything on every folder but read pastoral permissions. Specific permissions are required for pastoral, but beyond that, your super users have all permissions. That means that you don't want many super users. I see some schools with a lot of super users and end up asking who did what, and it could have been any one of those people. So in general, you use the least permissions possible. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that concept. That way you don't end up having users doing unwanted things. So there's more than one way to skin a cat. There's many ways to issue out permissions in Schoolbox. There's folder-based permissions, so that'll be for your directory. Group permissions, setting up things like extracurricular groups. People will receive notifications in those groups. One of the main ones you see are class code permissions, attaching a class code to a page. That'll manage your teacher for that page and all of the students. And one thing we come across is that when those class codes are removed, that also removes the permissions for the page. So something like a class rollover, when you remove the class code from the page, your teachers and students are no longer going to be able to get onto that page. And lastly, service permissions, so things like school news, pastoral services, they're managed separately via the user modify screen. So folder permissions, as said earlier, you just put the subject code in there. That'll manage the information from your sys and pull through the student and teachers for you. I don't know what I'm talking about. Group permissions. So that's more for individual users, people you're wanting to manage for, like, in particular, extracurricular or news pages. One thing that has that the class page doesn't have is you get notifications for things like news items, blogs published. There's 3 different levels for the group that you can have: restricted, moderated, and open. A restricted group is going to be for something that you don't want people to have open access to. Funny that. Choke. Yep, class codes. So yeah, as mentioned earlier, a lot of people get to the end of the term. They think to roll over the folder code, that class is finished, but there's still some action required on the page. That folder code needs to stay there so that the users can still write to add their last touches to the grades, so the students can still make their last minute submissions. So really, you're only looking to roll over the class or remove that class code when everybody's finished doing what they need to do on that page. And server permissions from the screen. That covers things that aren't really covered by the folder or the group level permissions. That's going to be things like your posting to news, anything that's in that little list there. Later, Sam will cover some use case, some best use scenarios, so ways you can effectively and quickly use these Schoolbox permissions. And I'll hand over to Sam to cover the next part of this.
Thanks for that overview, Manny.
Thanks, Sam.
So, as many of you have already been in my sessions, I am still Sam Bailey. I am a sysadmin at Alaris, and I help with a lot of keeping your servers running on a day-to-day basis. One of the things that we've noticed and why we brought this session up was we recognise that our permission system isn't simple. There's about, as Matt alluded to, there's about 6 different layers to it and how you can pull them together. Now, a lot of you will be doing most of this fairly well. which is great news. But what I wanted to highlight was just some of the little features that you may or may not have been aware of in different parts of the permission system, and maybe how you can get some extra benefits out of them. Now, hopefully I remember what I put in my slides, which would be particularly useful. One of the things that we have, and actually changed in 16.5, what we'd had previously before 16.5 was a system where certain kinds of permission systems completely overrode the others. And what changed in 16.5, as well as adding yet another permission layer, was the concept of highest permission wins. So previously, a good example was if you'd had class codes on your pages, that's going to give the teachers write access and the students read access to that page. But then you've also got role permissions on those same pages. So what had happened in the past is if you'd had teachers set to read access and that page also then had a class code on it, your teachers weren't able to do anything because it actually took the role permissions over the class code. Now it's highest permission wins. So if it's they've got a class code on and that gives them write access, it doesn't matter what other system, whether it's the CMS privilege giving them read access or a role or group-based access, it's the highest permission of all the wins, which should hopefully simplify those edge cases that you may have been coming up with from time to time between a few different parts of our permission system. Inherit permissions was one of my favorites that I tried to champion quite heavily to bring in. It's on by default for when you create subfolders, which the whole idea there was to solve two particular use cases. There's a lot of ways we could have done things. We could have copied how Active Directory does its entire complex permission system. But the idea was to solve two main use cases. Number one was you have a teacher with a class. They may have extra group members in that class through group permissions as well. There's role permissions on that page. But when they want to create a subfolder, most of the time they just want to give access to what their students need in it. They can still create a subfolder and turn off inherit and then manually put, maybe create some small groups that they want working in and give them right access to their own page to work on some things. But inherit should solve a lot of that kind of stuff, and it is turned on by default to help them create those pages. The other case that it was designed for was to handle when you have non-teaching groups. So whether it's your finance department, a curriculum committee that you've had, and that they need not just maybe one folder, but they need to be able to create a whole set of folders to manage their work. And inherit can easily take one group, so you have to manage it in one place, and then inherit all the way down. In version 17, we also have now added the extra bit, which I originally hoped to add in the first release, but didn't quite make it. So what happens in 17 with inherit, or more accurate, what happens in 16.5 with inherit permissions, if, say, there was a news post or a file uploaded in one of those subfolders, there were no notifications at all from it. So it's effectively kind of hidden from the notification system. Only the stuff right at the top of that tree were actually firing out. In 17, notifications that are triggered on lower pages will now fire up as if they were from the top page that they come from. So that means that if you've got a board committee who's added their board notes, or finance has added new notes, or policy has been added, the fact those files have been added can be notified throughout the rest of that group very easily, as well as news and the rest of the notifications. So it's going to give you a bit more flexibility on how you design different folder structures and not have to necessarily limit to one page if you did need the notifications anymore. So that certainly opens up a little bit more.
If that was a class page,
yep.
You had a subfolder, could you put a course outline on that?
Courses have a little bit more work separately. Yes, you could still get notifications off it, but there are a few other controls outside of just the basic access around courses, and particularly when you come to still being able to use it for analytics purposes. There's probably a gap there where, although a course could now go on that page, get notifications, and they'd have access to do the work because it knows about the class code coming down. I have to check with some of the developers, but I believe there's probably still a gap in linking that course is explicitly with that code. We probably haven't made that relationship quite as clear yet, though with everything else that's opening up, that may be a possibility going forward as well. One of my favorites is service permissions, because there's a lot of times that I get a query that's either to our support team or even sometimes escalated to me. That's a question of, I've got this really hard problem, I can't find a way to solve it, only to realise that we have service permissions to help you with these scenarios. One of the reasons they're not as obvious to everyone, aside from, mostly it's that they're not as visible. The only place you can edit these is manually on the user modifier screen for a particular user. There's a lot on that page. You set all the stuff at the top, and you scroll down, there's linked users, a whole range of things. So they are there. You've probably known them mostly if you've been using them for some of the elite modules, such as pastoral care, resource booking, setting the moderators, and setting up sports fixtures access and that sort of stuff. But there's 3 others that have been there for eons, around specifically the calendar, news, and the CMS, that can be quite useful if you'd like to try and, if you've got users that need a bit more access in particular areas, but don't need full super user access. The least used one is probably the CMS privilege. What that does, if you gave a user CMS moderate privilege, that gives them effectively super user access over the entire resource structure, but they then can't log into the admin system of Schoolbox. Which can be useful when you've got people who are in a role of authority that need to be able to manage a large part of the system, for whatever that reason may be, and not necessarily have them in as a super user as well with the full privileges that provides in terms of impersonating users and changing settings on accident or purpose, as the case may be. User and, sorry? At the moment, that is still the entire system, but because it's been underutilised, there's probably improvements that are perfectly viable for it that no one's asked for, seeing that that's the starting point. I have seen requests in the past, particularly around wanting one section of the system for a head of faculty to manage a particular area. There's a common one that I've seen before, which you can somewhat do, particularly if it's around course area, with some of the inherent permissions, being able to have them as a group moderator at the start and bring some of the inherent permissions down over an area. But it depends on the content that you're working on, so there's a little bit of a gap there. Yeah, so you could use a CMS privilege for a dean of all faculty, and then they can still at least control all of that stuff, which is perfectly relevant. Of course, you've got to be careful if you ever put board member notes in there, but aside from that, they may have been super users before when they did have access anyway, but there's an opportunity in certain cases that you may not have to give them as much, but just enough. News and, sorry, Craig? Yes, they can give themselves permission to do that. Now that we've done it once, I'm sure there's other options that we could expand that in future. That's the first time that we've had a feature that super users haven't had default access to. They do have the privilege to grant themselves the access, but it's not there by default. So it's a little bit of a different step, and yeah, I imagine there'll be a lot more other use cases that concept could be applied to, including some of the discussions that we had in some of the other sessions around there are certain actions that perhaps logging in as a super user anyway, being the strongest permission group, perhaps it should actually treat you not as a super user initially, and then when you want to use super user functions that you flick a switch to turn that on, whether that's also secondary password prompted or just not default to super user access. That may have its benefits as well with that kind of idea of reducing the use of super user systems for only when you need them. There's nothing worse than going around through a resource browser as a super user and accidentally scrolling and putting folders in the wrong place. Go ahead. So what I was mentioning here is about the breakdown as super users can do everything. There's a range of people who may do those different kinds of tasks and they don't need access to the full capabilities. So part of the idea of the service privileges is to enable that breakdown. So you could give them just explicitly these three parts of what effectively would be super user privileges otherwise. There is scope to break these down further and to have more service privileges so you can have people with those specific parts. There is an example change that I would love to do, but is predicated on requiring a rebuild of our very ancient admin system, both in how it displays and how the code runs underneath. An example would be, that I've discussed with James, is taking the CMS privilege. It would seem perfectly natural for someone who had a CMS moderator privilege, who can control everything in the resource structure, to also then just be able to manage the homepage templates as well as the folder bulk upload process. Those would be able to marry together quite well, but at the moment in the current system we're not able to split that out very easily. But it's something that I'm very interested in being able to give just enough access to the people who need that access, instead of just having the big hammer of super user when I can't solve it any other way. And that applies with the news and calendar privileges too. They have a couple of extra config options that go with them, because it's you can turn off, for example, from posting to school news and the school calendar, to disable staff from doing that, and then using specific staff members to control it if you prefer to have that more controlled workflow, and use these service privileges to enable that. Other people prefer to have the greater scope. I've had conversations with people preferring that they'd like to have any staff post to news, and but have it on a time delay and require someone else that gets a notification saying, can you just moderate this, similar to how the resource booking moderator process would work. These are all perfectly valid things that we could continue to look at in future.
With the service permissions, is there any way to audit who's got what at any point? Rather than go through every single member of staff's account?
If you call us, we can give you a quick list, or we can show you where to easily get that data from the database if you've been using access to that. There's no page for it at the moment. I always want more auditing tools within Schoolbox for you, and in 17, one of the things we open up is, when those videos haven't converted properly, how can I find out if that's the case? And can I reset it again? In 17 of Schoolbox, there's a transcode, a media area in the admin system. You can see any current processing files and any ones that have failed, and you can issue it to retry again. Another one of our favourite support tasks that we can give you greater control of. Yeah, so there's certainly scope for that kind of thing. Yeah, adding that kind of administrative audit, so you could both see what's going on across the system for something like that. It is hidden, and that's from you, because it's just this one section on the individual users page. It's hard to keep the visibility of what's going on over. So I'd be certainly open to that kind of stuff. We keep adding things to the admin system, but we kind of really need to do that last bit of work and rebuild it to make it a bit easier to use, because as much as there's lots of functionality there, it's not always easy to find it and find what's relevant. The next feature, which is tied into a lot of other discussions and the other groups discussions we've had, is around dynamic groups. I love that picture. So when you're using your group management, you do currently have kind of three ways to do it. You can either manually add users to a group, whether it's also importing as a one-off task from another group, which most people don't really know of, even though it is sitting there. The other one is if you've got a big list that you've manually built outside, you can just get email addresses or usernames, external IDs, and paste them in as one go and create your initial group. And then, of course, you can use inherit from there, so you can make it one page that you're managing instead of 15. That's been there for a while now. The user provisioning system, there's a great talk that happened earlier about how to use dynamic groups in the user provisioning system. The key to here is particularly you've only got a certain amount of tokens visible for each role type, so particularly around parents, but the common ones around year levels, houses and campuses are all there. So you can put students in a house-based page very easily and have it managed this way without having to use virtual class codes that were handling that before. Dynamic Scripts was a great feature we added, but it doesn't the take-up of it hasn't been as quick as we would have hoped. So if you do need help with it, please contact our support team. We've done lots of training through our team to make sure everyone knows how to use this feature. So if you need some help with how this could help you manage your system on a day-to-day basis, then it's certainly there. And the last one, which as James rightly targeted, was the Arden Script, as we referred to it. Now, there's only about 4 schools currently using it, but where everyone is welcome to do so. And this is that process where you want parents to be able to be put into home pages based as group members based on the class codes their students are in. Now, this doesn't mean that you're putting them necessarily into the class page. You may have a separate page for parents that's related to that. Even if you took a raw example of, you could have every student in Year 9 that was taking maths class based on 5 different maths codes. You could have a parent page that was about Year 9 maths information for parents, and so they could get those notifications. There's a lot of capabilities with it. Craig up the back there did push us very, very hard to make sure we got that in and working. But it is only a stepping stone. So as James would have mentioned, and I probably did as well, we want to expand, as much as we've got a fair few notifications possible that we can send out, we want to be able to do more pages where you could turn on for a particular page that the parents of the students in this page also receive notifications, as long as they have read access to the page through, say, the role permissions, because that will be able to open up, particularly, would be really useful, I found, trying to help out primary schools, especially those first prep to grade 3 kind of year levels, where it's not really the students that are the primary targets of the information in there, it's very much so the parents. Whereas the students slowly and gradually increase the amount of interactivity with Schoolbox itself. Our team's happy to deploy the Arden Script, as we refer to it, as far and wide as we need to. The clunkiness with that system is if you need to make changes, you need to be able to upload it to the Schoolbox server in a specific location, and we can give you access to that. That said, you're not probably going to be doing a lot of changes to that throughout the term. It's probably going to be a certain, would you agree, Craig, it's probably on the update twice a year kind of idea? Yep. So although the maintainability is not particularly easy, once it's up and running, you can just keep it running for that term. So the user management API and dynamic groups. So since we added it to the UPS, and now that I've been spruiking the fact that user management API has existed for the last 10 years and only about 4 schools were using it initially, as James mentioned, we're interested in increasing our APIs, both for partners to integrate and also to give you more capability that even if we don't yet have a feature, that you've got a reasonable way and compatible way of managing that if you've got the capability to do so. So we'd be open to creating that idea. The question is how many people and schools would be interested in it, considering if it's an API-based thing, you're obviously doing some work yourself to throw requests to that API. But if there's enough interest of the list of APIs that James is interested in us pushing forward through next year, the more interest, the higher up the list it goes.
Can I make a comment on that?
Yep.
There's a function in the Arden Script that we actually use to add an API effectively. We send commands to that via script and we can use it to add and remove users from this. And we manage all that.
So there is some capability from the low end from there. But that's controlled from the server as opposed to being able to fire requests at it. Yeah.
Sorry, but those groups as well, and news items, you can't target news items to groups like normal house groups. Can you test that?
So you can have your house groups and use these range of different controls to get the right people into that group, and then using the homepage news as opposed to the school news can then go out to those groups. Yeah, and that's the problem. There's 2 systems, as James highlighted. And one of the things that like some of the more obvious ones is that there's no feature image capability in the homepage news system than there is in the global news system. Ideally, we need to merge those systems and get the better feature set of both of them. At the moment, you can achieve it, but you have to be using the homepage news feature and creating the news there to make that achievable. So that your extracurricular page that you'd like parents to be in, are you using class codes to get the students on there? Okay, so that's the missing step. If it's not, there's only at the moment in UPS you've only got a certain amount of tokens, which is mostly around campus, house, year level kind of stuff, which were the more common ones initially to get up and running with. And then with this other script, we account for based on class codes, but just on student as a member of this group. We need the parents either in or at least getting notifications about it. That's the missing step that we need, the full notification capability instead of the Arden script to achieve. So the student is a member of this page, turn on parent notifications based on their students in here. That's that missing step. And yeah, I think there is a missing step. That part of that also includes the link up with how some of the sports fixtures works. Which has been highlighted a few times to me in the last day. So we are aware of there's a couple of missing gaps there that we need to continue to fill in. At the moment, it would have to be a manual one-off import. You can bulk load them, at least, so if you know the list of your external IDs or your usernames, you can just do a one-off import and your group manage group, add list, go. So it shortens the time a little bit, but it's still manual management, unfortunately, in that part. No, it's not dynamic. Last one I wanted to highlight was linked accounts, which it's not really as such a permission system, but it's a good feature around this area. Linked accounts was designed to solve the parents who are staff problem. That was its core idea. And you set up linked accounts as one-way links. So for a parent who's a staff, we normally set up a two-way link between the two, which means parent logs in usually as default to their staff member, and when they want to, they can easily click their profile and switch to their parent account or back again. It's really useful for testing. So if you jump in as a super user on your dev server, or even on your live, but if you're on your dev server and need to test a few things, I commonly link in my test systems a staff member, a student in multiple campuses, and a parent of multiple year levels, and it's a one-way link. So even if it was in the live server, they can't come back into your account, but it does go. You can quickly access from that. Just like a staff switching to their parent role, you can quickly switch to other accounts to test things. It's highly, highly useful as a super user when you're doing that testing. It reduces a lot of clicking around the system to get to what you need. The other thing that's not obvious to that system, and it also applies to our impersonate system, when you use impersonate or you do those switching, those linked account switch roles, we do actually log all of that to a particular table in our database. It's not actually exposed in anywhere in the user interface at the moment, but that audit logging is there to say that this person switched into this account, so that any actions taken at that time are obvious they're actually done as the person impersonating them and not as someone logging directly in as that user. Hi, Jane. So I want it in the admin system anyway, as I want many more of our logs, which we have under the hood that you can't see. That said, this one is in MySQL itself in our database, and we're very happy to give you read access to that if you don't already have it. We can show you where it is. It's a simple one to follow through.
The setting for linking accounts, can you edit that using the user provisioning API?
No. Oh, the user management API, no, and the UPS also doesn't handle it yet. That's one of the features that I want to add into the user provisioning system. There is one caveat to that. I do have a one-off process, or at least a script I can give you if you log into the server to run. It only applies to Synergetic schools though, because in Synergetic, the staff and parent account, it's the same ID in Synergetic, so we can easily detect that there are people in staff roles and in parent roles with the same ID, and auto-link them together for you. So unfortunately, it only applies to the synergetic schools, that quick script that I wrote way back when, but our staff can run it, or we can show you where it is if you log into your server and you need to run it. It's got a dry run, so you can quickly run and say who it's going to attempt to link together, and then an active version, so you can do that. Yes, any script can be scheduled. Hadn't thought to do that actually, which is a bit bizarre. Thank you for that. It is an option, so if you're interested in that helping you out, then that's something you can do. It's a little bit more difficult. We need to work out the ways to define access for some of the other systems on how to work out which parent and staff account are linked, because that's not always as obvious as it just happens to be in Synergetic where they share the same ID. That's the kind of idea. But linked accounts, highly useful.
Just a suggestion. You touched on the fact that when you're a super user, you don't really want to have blanket permissions. The way I use linked accounts is I use my normal teacher account, and then when I want to become a super user, I link the super user account to my account. So that's just
That's a great way of doing that. So yeah, having your super user account not necessarily as a directly log-inable account, and then you can switch roles to back up into that super user account, which is also logged, as I said, in that system. Ideally, we'd make that even easier and just have it so you log in by default and you have to flick the switch just by default, so instead of the manual setup of that. But yes, that's a great idea. I'd encourage that. There was another question I thought, yep.
Is there a workaround to check what users changed what?
Yes.
Is that something you guys would do?
It's already in our database, we just haven't exposed it in the admin system. You may have missed that before, but we can give you access. We'll show you where that is in the database, so if you want to check that out, you can.
I don't have clarity. For example, assessment that's been deleted, don't have that.
There is a range of actions, it just exclude outside of superuser and impersonate. There's a range of actions that aren't as audit logged as heavily as I would like. There is stuff that we can still work out based off a combination of logs, including our web access logs and a whole range of different things that we can pull together and have done in many emergency situations to sort out accidental or malicious changes. But ideally, we'd like that to be logged a bit more clearly in one place so that you can easily bring that through. An interesting example is in the admin system, there's a user bulk modify section, so you can select a whole heap of users and do a bulk change, which people don't use as much now because the user provisioning handles a lot of that work. But as an example, if you do changes in that, the entire set of changes and what you change them to is actually all logged in a newer audit logging system that we've built. The challenge is then bringing everything through to link that together. A lot of things that we did recently was changing, so we soft delete almost everything now in Schoolbox. What that means is it's flagged in the database as deleted, but everything is still there. And what we changed a lot of our systems to was to have not just a flag to say it's done and it has been deleted, but it's explicitly was deleted at this date and time. And we've got tools that is able to link everything together based on the order things were cascade deleted and that sort of stuff. The next step is being able to link that to, instead of being able to combine a couple of different log systems together to get the data of who did what exactly when, to actually bring that all into one system and then to be able to expose that through the admin system so that you can see exactly what's going on beyond just the someone uploaded, modified a homepage or folder or all that kind of stuff, which is logged heavily already, but the more specific of added new components to a page or deleted assessment item, all that kind of stuff to make it a bit more clear. Although we can find it, it's not as easy as we'd like it to be.
Having said that, though, will be someone who has right access to the page, and if it's only
it's
your
just a short list
that have right access,
You seem to come with a proof.
So otherwise, yes. I'm open to open questions, even if it's not specifically related to this. Jane. So as part of that 17 upgrade, what we're talking about is if there's already things that have occurred on those those inherited subfolders, and if they're now going to trigger notifications in 17. The short answer is, as part of that upgrade, only new, well, in theory, if there's a notification on a page, say an event that's already been, say, a future published news item on one of those subfolders, as an example, those items will get upgraded in our new heavily rebuilt notification system to use our new system, which means that in theory they would trigger. In practice, some of them won't. What will mostly be is all new activity on those pages will notify. I expect there's a few certain kinds of notifications which will trigger fine, but part of the problem is the way that that notification is sent out, which, to delve a little bit technically, the idea is that when an event occurs on that subfolder, it's not just that it's fired off directly there and somehow knows that it's to go off to the people who are following up the tree. It actually gets fired at the top of the tree, saying that it was referring down to that subfolder. So there's a few things that might skip if they happen to be existing events that haven't quite completed yet. The other side to that is part of that notification system rebuild does fix that problem where with the re-notification of certain things that used to trigger in future, which I know you did have an issue with, Jane, and a few other schools did, where it would resend a notification when there was future notification still left on it.
What about if you called, let's say, new source notifications? Is that two notifications to all those pages that have removed?
Not quite. That's that alternate source idea and pulling the notifications through on that. We wanted to add that as well, but didn't quite make that in this release.
I thought that was up as well.
Did we?
Yeah, I think it's there.
We'll have to come back to you on that one. My boss seems to think it's there, so that's probably a good help. But
We were working to release that in V17, and as part of that work, Inherit came along with it, because in the end they were one and the same.
they worked a similar process. So.
Do you know much more on it?
If I may, I definitely remember looking at that code. I'll have to get back to you all about it.
We know we certainly tried to. Whether it got there in the end is another question.
Such last minute, yeah. We weren't going to make it in the last week. We're still reviewing that whole area, and it came through last minute. Yeah. So, as far as I'm aware, both the alt source linking and the inherit.
So maybe / probably.
Now we're subscriptions.
Just a quick thing, is there an easy way to visually identify the difference between a course and a class? Because teachers get confused going in and clicking in the wrong place and deleting the wrong thing.
Maddie, do you want to take this one?
A request from
A range of schools.
Yeah, a range of schools was to when you look at classes and course pages in the resource browser, they have their unique icons, and so a couple of schools have requested for those icons to be indicated in the actual page, say next to the heading of the page. Would that be something that would work?
Or a colour.
Or a colour?
Yeah.
What about if you're colourblind?
I'm colourblind. That's half my support team.
I think it has to be a visual, like an object rather than a color. But yeah, I think just bringing those icons in the course, the unit, and a class page icon. Yeah. Mm.
Naming convention.
Yeah.
Already possible, yeah.
So yes, naming conventions could work as well.
Done naming convention, but it's just not obvious.
People are still humans, yes.
You just get recognized instantly, because if you do it through your class page rather than through the resource browser, you just get taken to the place.
Yes, you get directly linked through there. Yeah. Yep, so you can use some of the templating and colour systems to do that as well. Before I take yours, there was one question here.
We want to open up some of our curriculum to parents, down to the course level, not the unit level, which is a bit of a challenge because although you can push the permissions down initially, as you said before, when you're creating a new unit, creating a folder that will, by default, inherit the permissions from the course.
Yep.
Is there a solution to the challenge?
No, is the short answer.
You can create groups as a solution or something temporary.
Yeah. Well, the question is about controlling a push down to a certain depth level. Now, yes, you could try and restructure things in a different way to account for it, but that's trying to work around that difficulty as opposed to a real solution for it.
How many courses have you got? Just manually click the
Yeah, 6 schools, 250, 300.
Yeah, that's days of work there, Matty. Yeah.
The only way that we've done it is we've actually created a mirror page and the text becomes whatever is linked into the course page.
Oh, okay.
That way.
Using the alternate source to pull that data through into a parent page. That's an interesting idea.
Whoever manages the course, if that changes, we report that to the course.
Yeah, just thinking about that. And then you've got 2 pages per course on this post. Yeah.
But then it isolates the parents.
Yeah.
Pick your work around and compromise.
Cheers.
Ideally, always, yeah, we want to improve on that. If that's an issue that a lot of people come up against, then I'm sure we could, where you have that push down where it just keeps going down the entire tree, something along, whether it's along the being able to choose the depth it goes to, or something around that. If we can get enough examples that hurt you with that management of that system, then I'm sure we can find something to do it. The other side is also that even if you do have a policy for managing it, and the policy is in theory fine, also then being able to go, hey, can I take this in for entire folder structure? How can I visualize what the permissions are across what's going down, so you can see what's going on, not just what you're planning to do.
Yeah. Inevitably you miss. When you go through manual, you miss the odd folder.
As I like to say, humans and computers. It covers most cases. So the question here is a common one we've had from schools around the digest system. So what has been happening is, a good example is a news post, and it's been scheduled to go out by the digest system, and digest hasn't gone out yet, and then someone makes an update to that news post. Or in the other case, that news post was only relevant for 24 hours and has since archived, but because of the way it's set up, parents may only be getting notified every few days, and that item still goes out in their digest where if they clicked on it, it basically shows doesn't exist anymore in Schoolbox. So those deleted items are now archived items as well as the edited ones. What's happened up until now is the original notification for how it was built is what goes out, and there's no change to that. There's a couple of caveats to that where we do reissue notifications on edit and merge them together and do a little bit of a thing. But that's been one of the problems we've had. Now, version 17 of Schoolbox and the rebuild that we did doesn't yet fix that, however gives us the framework to do that now. That wasn't possible due to design decisions that we originally had. But now that we've done that rebuild and we've designed to allow for that to happen now, that we can build that now. It's now an option. But it isn't actually in the 17.0 release yet. It is something that we drastically want. A lot of support tickets around that. The other one that it's going to enable in future will be targeting emergency broadcast systems as well, to be able to force a broadcast out by the highest level of notification, whether that's push or instant plus instant email, to go out to schools is something that was really highlighted to us after the Queensland floods that occurred, that we needed to be able to assist schools who have already got the connection out to parents and all the stuff on site. So whether it was a lockdown or school is closed or a major change for the school, the manual process of having to force up the notification level and then send a news notification and then manually take it all down is technically works, but is very cumbersome and is not as reliable as, because it requires a lot of manual steps. So there's improvements to that James and I have been working with our developers on how we can achieve that, because it's something that could be really quite useful. Craig at the back. I did, even though there's another discussion on notifications.
Is there a way going forward where you can allocate priority levels to groups of users and have time frames allocated around when they can and can't send notifications?
Not currently, but that should almost now be possible with the new framework to actually consider as an option now. It wasn't an option before until we rebuilt that. Yep. Yep. Yeah, timescales would be useful not just from your system level, but also per user. I should be able to. It makes perfect sense that I should be able to choose as a user that I don't want to get a push notification before 8 a.m. These are kinds of things that are now possible with the frameworks that we've built, but aren't there yet. There is a session, I don't know, is it currently now or a bit later, with Matt Day and Josh, who will be talking about some of the notification stuff, and Chris Lang from Digistorm. Matt Day is the one who did the bulk of the work in designing and building. I helped encourage him excessively, and a few late nights of what use cases we needed to solve. But he's got some great ideas on what we can do going forward and what's possible. Those kind of ideas make perfect sense going forward. Of course, I've got no time frames for that, but it's now at least. I like things for at least being able to be possible as opposed to waiting on a large rebuild. That large rebuild's now happened. It opens up a lot of changes that we can do going forward that we've been building up over time. Quicken, yeah. So I believe what we're referring to is when you've got really deep inherit structures, and it does say it inherits from the other pages. I can't remember, and Matt may be about to correct me. I'm not sure if that link goes then straight back just to the page above, or if it goes all the way back to the top. Yeah. Yeah, which is no good. So ideally, it should be able to tell you that it goes all the way back to this page, and you can just click once to go straight there. Even better would be to try and display those permissions there to see what virtually they are, but that may be a much more significant change to how we have to work our code to make that work. But a simpler change may be to be able to identify that here's the page above it that it's inheriting from, and then here's the link to the core page that it's actually going all the way back to. That may be a shorter term thing that's more possible.
To see the core page.
Well, yeah, tooltip or something like that should be possible. I don't know if there's a forum post for that already, but if there wasn't, I'd highly encourage that one.
By the way, the managing your notifications presentation is next in this room.
Oh.
Yeah, at 12 p.m.
Oh, that sounds good.
Also, Craig, you said some people are posting at 4:30 a.m. I'm sure that's not you, just late night. I know that future homepage news posts, because there's no time on, they're gonna be posted at 12 a.m. or somewhere within those few hours as that schedule runs. In 17, we finally added times to homepage news so that you can at least avoid
So
push notifications.
yet another feature that was in school news, not in homepage news. You could choose the date that was published, but not the time.
Yeah.
A date in our notification system is midnight, so that's not quite as useful.
If you leave it blank, it goes.
Current,
Yeah.
yes, but now you've got the option to set them times.
Yeah, that's another popular request to
Set-
set the default start time
Yep.
for certain things. Yeah, for
Sorry, we had another question.
Right.
So all of the actions in your system take place based on the time zone that's set within Schoolbox. It doesn't actually account for specific users in different time zones. If we start going down the path of adding that users can control the times, it may be something that we'll have to try and detect, which is not always easy based on where users are, and people do move time zones. But at the moment, everything's based on the core time zone set in the admin system for your setup. So at least it is all relative to that time. It wasn't always in the past, but it certainly is now. Everything we go back is based on that time.
Someone spoke briefly about as cargo for pages. Is there a way to shut that down for staff to change colors without one?
Yes. There is a config option in the admin system that blocks anyone but super users from changing the color scheme that you've chosen for your pages. It blocks out that entire section. That was added a couple of years ago, I think, when certain schools had chosen to lock all that down. If I remember correctly, it is somewhat of a global thing though. So it means that you can't, in practice, just lock down certain pages and not others. But it is, if you wanted to go down that path and you set up your at least in terms of the colors, yes, you can do that. Our support team will walk you through that if you need a hand. So it's a great question by Andrew over there. If you are locking down your colors, it's not going to revert all the existing pages back to what your new standard colors are. So that said, I have multiple times in the past enforced color changes across pages. So our support team does have that capability to push that through your database. It's not particularly difficult to do. For us to, you just choose, this is our color set, we need all of these sets of pages to do that. We can do that. It's not something we've done for a while. We did it a lot a few years ago, but not recently. But if you want to, especially when people were cleaning up the new color system, we can at least help you with that in the meantime if you want to switch over to locking those down and cleaning up the old ones. Color inheritance. Oh. Now you're pushing me. That might be on the to-do list for a little bit longer. Oh, colouring notifications. I'd settle for being able to disable the images on notifications. That's me from a server performance point of view again. The less requests. Yeah, there's some interesting ideas. As James and Matt have both highlighted, the forum, we really value what you vote for in the forums. It gives direct feedback, not just from, you give feedback to your account managers anyway, they try and collect that from you and they do record that. But being able to look and say, look, this is exactly, there's 8 schools who really could use this feature, it had a great benefit for them. This is the value that we're able to apply to that, and prioritise that work is incredibly valuable to us.
This may not be your area, but the forums are hard work to navigate. Like you have to go through 12 links to try and find the area, to find the post, and you got to go right to the bottom of the box to post the new thread.
Yes. We've done some improvement to the forum system, and what we've found is that using Schoolbox both as our internal intranet, we have an instance to that, as well as the help system, that dog fooding idea has greatly highlighted those exact issues that aren't, where certain parts of the system that just aren't quite as usable. There is a raft of improvements that could be done for the forums, certainly. Which work we prioritise, I'm not sure, depending on.
There's been a discussion going around with the dev team about having like a component action button such as post thread be static, so as you scroll it remains in view one.
As Matt's mentioning, the development team and the rest of us as well are all very much focused on, there's a whole heap of things where Schoolbox is extremely functional, but could simplify the access to that functionality. And ongoing for new features as well as revamping old ones, there will be a whole focus on the UX, the user experience, on how they interact and use those features. That's where the difficulties come in, where taking something as a single feature like forums, There are some schools that do not use them at all. Now that could be they just didn't have a use for them. It could be they found them too hard to use. And being able to get the data that James has been alluding to about being able to opt in to be able to do a little bit more analytics across the whole fleet, to give us a better use of who's using what features, not just that they're there and sitting on a page, but actually in use and the frequency of use. We'll be able to highlight which areas are really struggling, and then we might need to put a lot more work in to make them more easier so they can be more used, or to change how they work so that they're actually something useful for you. There was a second question.
But is there a keyword search within the forums? So if I'm looking at home pages, I click on home page and
I know if you do a normal search, you can just choose forums, and it goes through that area. But in terms of specific keywords or tags or labels, it would be something that we've thought about in the past, but not currently, as far as I'm aware. Maddie.
We've recently minimised the forum categories, which you might have noticed. So we used to have 30 or so for the idea, 30 or so ideas categories. Now we've minimised it to about 10 or so. The quickest way I'm able to find posts or to check if a post already exists is I use one of those categories and then just do a page, an in-browser page search for some keywords. At the moment, that's the fastest way I've found. We hope to one day have a vote button. We think schools would benefit from a vote button in the class, getting the class to vote on things, and that would certainly help out for them as well. But, we haven't really delivered that, I guess, or pushed down that road because it's not the most popular feature at the moment. And we're wary of making improvements to Schoolbox that would only benefit our needs, compared to schools.
Yeah. So the common thing is when our OLEX and our TAMs who are managing the help system comes through, if they come through with a feature that only helps Schoolbox Help and not the rest of you, it gets pushed down. Because ideally we need to find something that helps us but also helps you. So we're not going to just, because we're using our own software, we need to make something that's valuable. You're the ones using it everywhere. The main things that we do definitely find that happen first there is we have over 18,000 users in Schoolbox Help, which is a bit bigger and breaks a lot of things than we didn't plan for. So we have made changes that improve performance to handle that level of scale, which is great if we finally get some schools at that size. But it also means that performance and those kinds of changes do trickle down to give you better functionality and easier use of certain heavier features within Schoolbox. So that what the question was about, being able to restrict the areas that the search feature does use. Being able to, it's not there at the moment, but it would be, I imagine it would be possible to try and do a restrictive search. We've also had discussions about whether, without having to build a very large and heavy search system to power it, whether there were certain tweaks that we could do, like small restrictions to the search scope, whether that include time-based restrictions as well, or being able to default to only searching a certain period of time and then looking outside that if there was no results, to find a little bit more relevancy. Some of the things we'd looked at in the past to rebuild that search system ended up with solutions that could do everything we wanted, but would effectively had to double or triple the resource capacity of your server to be able to handle natively, which was obviously a no-go. So. Yeah. A few extra filters for restrictions could greatly enhance that for you as well. I find the exact same thing. The last change that we did do was to remove a whole heap of restrictions in the search system, where it couldn't search on certain kinds of words, or if words are really current, they weren't found. The classic one was if you searched for first aid in almost any of your systems pre version 16.5, you would have got basically no results. even though you had lots of things that had the word first and aid, and the combination of the two, it couldn't find any of them. That all works now, but now, yeah, we do certainly need to be able to improve that further. If you've got specific filters in mind, I'd like to see them in the forum so that we can try and collate them together and say, these are the ones that we need to build out, because they could, although they'd be small to medium changes to our code base to do, they could have a significant value for searching and accessing resources in the system. Thanks very much, everyone.